The dawn over Olympic Boulevard in Los Angeles was gray and unforgiving, a marine layer of fog rolling in from the coast to mix with the smog of the waking city. Min-ho sat on his idling Harley-Davidson Road King, the vibrations of the massive V-twin engine traveling up his spine, grounding him in the physical world. He was a large man, his shoulders broad under a leather vest that bore the patches of the Joshin Riders, a club known for its discipline and its iron grip on the neighborhood. The air smelled of wet asphalt, exhaust fumes, and the faint, spicy aroma of kimchi stew drifting from the all-night diners that were just closing their doors. Traffic was already building up, a river of steel and frustration as commuters tried to beat the rush hour, their horns blaring in a discordant symphony of impatience. Min-ho watched the chaos through the tinted visor of his helmet, feeling detached, a predator observing a herd of panicked sheep. He was waiting for his club brothers to assemble for a run up the coast, killing time with a cigarette that burned slowly between his gloved fingers. His mind was usually blank in these moments, a defensive wall built over years of violence and loss. But today the cold seemed to seep deeper than usual. On the corner, an elderly woman, a halmoni, struggled with a rusted shopping cart overflowing with plastic bottles and cardboard, the wheels stuck in a pothole near the crosswalk. She was tiny, bent almost double by osteoporosis and the weight of a hard life, wearing layers of mismatched floral patterns and a knitted hat. The light had changed to green for the pedestrians, but she was stuck, her frail arms pushing uselessly against the heavy cart. The signal began to flash the red hand, counting down the seconds before the cross-traffic would surge forward again. Min-ho flicked his cigarette ash onto the pavement, his eyes narrowing as he watched the cars in the turning lane inch forward, the drivers shouting obscenities at the old woman. No one got out. No one offered a hand. It was the typical apathy of the city, where everyone was too important, too busy, or too scared to engage with the struggles of another human being. He felt a familiar cynicism rise in his chest, a confirmation that the world was exactly as cold as he believed it to be. Then movement from the alleyway caught his peripheral vision, a small ragged shape darting out like a frightened stray cat. It was a boy, no older than 14, wearing a stained hoodie that was too thin for the weather and dirty jeans that ended above his ankles. He was barefoot, his feet callous and grimy against the freezing concrete, his hair matted and wild. He didn't look at the cars. His eyes were fixed solely on the grandmother struggling in the middle of the intersection. Without hesitation, the boy ran into the street, throwing his hands up to signal the oncoming SUVs to stop, a bold move that earned him a fresh chorus of angry honks. He didn't flinch at the noise or the proximity of the bumpers. He grabbed the front of the rusted cart and pulled while the woman pushed. He shouted something to her, his breath puffing in white clouds in the chilly air, and together they dislodged the wheel from the pothole. The boy steered the cart with surprising strength, guiding the woman safely to the sidewalk, just as the traffic light turned green and the cars roared past. Min-ho sat motionless, his hand frozen halfway to the throttle, stunned by the display of raw courage and selflessness. He had seen men do brave things for money, for reputation, or for their brothers, but he rarely saw anyone do something brave for nothing. The boy didn't ask for money. He didn't even wait for a thank you. He simply bowed respectfully to the old woman, a culturally ingrained gesture that marked him as one of the community's lost children, and retreated back toward the shadows of the alley. The image of the boy's bare feet slapping against the cold asphalt burned into Min-ho's mind, triggering a memory he kept locked away in a dark room of his heart. It reminded him of his own younger brother years ago, before the streets and the drugs had taken him, back when they were just hungry kids trying to survive in a foreign land. The resemblance wasn't physical, but spiritual. It was the look of someone who had nothing, yet still found something to give. The light at the intersection cycled through its colors again, but Min-ho didn't move, the engine of his bike thumping a slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. He looked at the empty alley where the boy had vanished, then at the comfortable, expensive leather gloves on his own hands. A sudden wave of guilt washed over him, a feeling he detested because it made him feel weak, vulnerable, and human. He couldn't just ride away to the clubhouse, drink coffee, and talk about club politics as if he hadn't just witnessed a miracle on Olympic Boulevard. He revved the engine, the loud bark of the exhaust causing a nearby pedestrian to jump, but instead of turning toward the highway, he merged into the lane closest to the curb. He needed to know who the kid was, not to recruit him, not to hurt him, but because the universe had thrown a question mark in his face and Minho was a man who needed answers. He rolled slowly toward the alley entrance, the massive bike looking out of place among the garbage bins and discarded furniture. The alley was narrow, lined with the back doors of restaurants and overflowing dumpsters, the ground slick with grease and standing water. Minho navigated the bike carefully, his boots skimming the ground for balance, his eyes scanning the gloom for the boy. He spotted him huddled behind a stack of wooden pallets, trying to warm his hands by blowing on them, his body shaking violently from the adrenaline crash and the cold. Minho killed the engine, the sudden silence of the alley amplifying the distant noise of the city and the boy's ragged breathing. He kicked down the kickstand and swung his leg over the saddle, the leather of his chaps creaking, his heavy boots landing with a thud that made the boy flinch. The kid looked up, eyes wide with terror, seeing only a giant in black leather, a monster from the stories street kids told each other to stay awake at night. "Easy, kid," Minho said, his voice deep and gravelly, heavily accented but clear. He didn't step closer, respecting the distance, knowing that a cornered animal bites. He reached up and unbuckled his helmet, pulling it off to reveal a scarred face, dark eyes, and a shaved head, a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. "I saw what you did back there. With the Halmoni." The boy didn't speak, pressing his back against the brick wall, his eyes darting to the knife sheath on Minho's belt. Minho noticed the glance and slowly kept his hands visible, palms open, showing he wasn't there to enforce territory or collect debts. "You got a name?" Minho asked, fishing a pack of cigarettes from his vest, but deciding against lighting one, thinking it might look too aggressive. "Leo," the boy whispered, the sound barely audible over the hum of a nearby air conditioning unit. "I didn't steal anything. I was just helping." The defensive plea broke Minho's heart in a way a bullet never could. The kid assumed that any attention from an adult meant he was in trouble for existing. Minho looked at Leo's blue-tinged feet, then at his own heavy engineer boots, and made a decision that would violate half the rules of the street, but save his own soul. "I know you didn't steal anything, Leo," Minho said softly. "You paid a debt you didn't owe. Now I'm going to pay mine." He turned back to the bike, opening the saddlebag, leaving the boy confused and the story hanging on the edge of a new path. Minho rummaged through the leather saddlebag of his Road King, pushing aside tools and spare spark plugs until he found what he was looking for, a thick wool blanket he kept for roadside emergencies. It smelled of oil and exhaust, but it was heavy and warm. He turned back to Leo, who hadn't moved from his defensive crouch behind the pallets. The boy watched him with the intense, unblinking stare of someone who expects a trick, a trap that snaps shut the moment you reach for the bait. "Catch!" Minho grunted, tossing the blanket gently so it landed within the boy's reach, not on him. Leo hesitated, looking at the dark wool as if it might explode, his shivering becoming more violent as the adrenaline faded. Hunger and cold were warring for dominance in his small body. Slowly, with a hand that trembled uncontrollably, Leo reached out and dragged the blanket toward him, wrapping it around his shoulders instantly. "Why?" Leo asked, his voice cracking, the warmth of the wool doing little to melt the ice in his suspicion. "You a cop? Or with the gangs?" In this part of Los Angeles, those were the only two types of men who drove big bikes and wore cuts. Minho shook his head, leaning back against his motorcycle, crossing his massive arms. "Neither. I'm just a guy who hates seeing good deeds go punished. You hungry?" At the mention of food, Leo's stomach gave a loud, treacherous growl that echoed in the narrow alley. The boy blushed beneath the dirt on his cheeks, looking down at his bare feet. The physiological need was stronger than his fear. "I haven't eaten since yesterday," he admitted, shame coloring his tone. "The shelter was full. They kicked me out at 6. Minho nodded, familiar with the cruelty of the system. "There's a pojangmacha, a tent stall 2 blocks over. They make hot soup, kimbap, spicy rice cakes." He saw Leo's eyes light up at the description, a flash of childhood breaking through the hardened survivalist exterior. "I can't go in there," Leo said, looking at his filthy clothes. "They'll throw me out before I get to the counter." "Not if you're with me," Minho stated, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. He stood up, towering in the narrow space. "But I'm not leaving my bike here. You ride on the back, you know how to ride." Leo shook his head, terrified at the prospect of the roaring machine. "It's easy. Hold on to the strap. Don't wiggle. Lean when I lean." The pressure was on Minho now. He was taking a risk. Bringing a homeless kid onto his bike, associating with him in public, could be seen as weakness by his club brothers or worse, predatory by the police. But the image of the boy pushing that cart wouldn't leave him. He extended a hand, large and calloused, toward the boy. "Come on, I'm not asking, I'm telling, you need food." Leo looked at the hand, then at Minho's face. He saw the scars, the hardness, but he didn't see the cruelty he was used to. He stood up, clutching the blanket around him like a cape, and took the biker's hand. It was warm and rough, engulfing his own. Minho helped him onto the passenger pillion, showing him where to put his feet, his bare, freezing feet on the chrome pegs. "Keep your legs away from the pipes or you'll burn," Minho warned, putting his helmet back on. He didn't have a spare one, another violation of the law, but they were only going 2 blocks. He started the engine, and he felt Leo stiffen against his back, wrapping his thin arms around Minho's waist with a death grip. The bike lurched forward, rolling out of the alley and back into the morning light. As they rode the short distance, Minho felt the fragility of the passenger. The boy weighed nothing, a ghost clinging to the back of a dragon. People in cars stared. A terrifying biker with a dirty, blanket-wrapped child on the back. But Minho stared back with a ferocity that made them look away. He was protective now, a switch having been flipped in his brain. They arrived at the food stall, a semi-permanent structure with plastic tarps, steaming pots, and the loud chatter of Korean aunties cooking. Minho parked on the sidewalk, ignoring the no parking sign, and helped Leo down. The boy stumbled, his legs numb. Minho kept a hand on his shoulder, guiding him toward the entrance like a bodyguard escorting a VIP. Inside, the smell was heavenly. Sesame oil, chili paste, steaming broth. The owner, an older woman named Mrs. Park, who knew the Joseon riders well, looked up and frowned when she saw Leo. "Minho ya, what is this? You bringing strays now?" she asked in Korean, waving a ladle. Minho didn't smile. "He's a guest, auntie. Give us the corner table. And bring everything. Soup, rice, meat. Lots of meat." Mrs. Park saw the look in Minho's eyes, a rare seriousness that wasn't about violence, and nodded, her expression softening. "Sit. I'll feed him." Minho guided Leo to a plastic table in the back, sitting him down. Leo looked around nervously, pulling the blanket tighter, expecting to be yelled at. "Relax," Minho said, sitting opposite him. "Eat first, talk later." He pulled out his phone, seeing missed calls from his club president. He ignored them. The pressure of his double life, the ruthless enforcer versus the man he used to be, was mounting. He was supposed to be breaking legs for unpaid loans this morning, not feeding orphans. But when the food arrived, steaming bowls of galbitang, beef rib soup, and plates of dumplings, and he watched Leo eat with trembling hands, shoveling food into his mouth as if he might never see a meal again, Minho knew he was in trouble. He wasn't just buying a meal, he was getting involved. And in his world, getting involved was dangerous. The chapter ended with Leo wiping broth from his chin, looking at Minho with eyes that were no longer terrified, but filled with a heartbreaking gratitude. Minho felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. He couldn't just drop the kid back in the alley. The cold reality of the street was waiting outside, and Minho knew he had to make a choice that would bleed into the rest of his life. The meal ended, but the problem didn't. Minho watched Leo scrape the last grains of rice from the bowl, the boy's color returning slightly, though his lips were still pale. The warmth of the food tent was a temporary sanctuary, a bubble that would burst the moment they stepped back onto the sidewalk. Minho knew the rules of the street better than anyone. Help once, you're a savior. Help twice, you're a guardian. Help 3 times, you're a target. "You got family, Leo?" Minho asked, lighting a cigarette now that they were finished. Leo shook his head, staring at the empty plates. "Mum took off a year ago. Dad. Never knew him. I was in foster care in the valley, but I ran. It was bad there." Minho didn't press for details. Bad in the foster system usually meant abuse, and Minho had no desire to reopen those wounds for the boy. "So you live in the alley behind the BBQ joint?" Minho asked. Leo nodded. "It's warm near the vents, but the rats are big." The casual way Leo spoke about his living conditions made Minho's fists clench under the table. He took a drag of his cigarette, exhaling smoke toward the plastic ceiling. "You can't stay there. Not tonight. Forecast says it's dropping to near freezing." "I got nowhere else," Leo said simply, not complaining, just stating a fact. "I'll be okay. The blanket helps." He touched the wool blanket Minho had given him like it was a treasure. Minho knew he couldn't take the kid home. His apartment was a revolving door of club business, weapons, and illicit cash. It was no place for a child. As they stepped out of the tent, the reality of the neighborhood intruded. Two young men were leaning against Minho's bike, prospects from a rival street crew, the K-Town Killers, low-level thugs who dealt meth and harassed shopkeepers. They were eyeing the saddlebags. When they saw Minho, their bravado faltered, but they didn't scatter immediately. They saw the kid, the blanket, the strange pairing. "Yo, Minho," one of them sneered, a kid with a neck tattoo and too much attitude. "Didn't know the riders were running a daycare. That your bastard son?" The insult was sharp, meant to provoke. Leo shrank back behind Minho's massive frame. Minho handed his helmet to Leo. "Hold this," he said quietly. Minho walked up to the thug, his movement deceptively slow. "You touching my bike, son?" he asked calmly. The thug stepped back, hands up. "Just looking, man. Chill." Minho didn't chill. He grabbed the thug by the collar of his windbreaker and slammed him against the brick wall of the restaurant, the sound of the impact sickeningly loud. "This kid," Minho growled, pointing a finger at Leo without looking at him, "is under my protection. You see him in the alley, you walk the other way. You see him sleeping, you keep quiet. If I hear he got hassled, I'm coming for your fingers, all of them." The thug nodded frantically, eyes bulging. Minho released him, and the two punks scrambled away, vanishing down the block. Leo stared at Minho, trembling again. He had seen violence before, but never used on his behalf. "Why did you do that?" Leo asked, his voice small. "They're gonna come back." Minho took the helmet back. "They're hyenas. They only attack when you're alone. Now they know you're not alone." But Minho knew the escalation was real. By claiming the boy, he had put a flag in the ground. The K-Town Killers were petty, but they were vindictive. If they couldn't touch Minho, they might wait until he was gone to hurt the boy, just to send a message to the Joseon riders. He had inadvertently painted a target on Leo's back while trying to wipe it off. He drove Leo back to the alley, the ride silent. When Leo hopped off, handing back the blanket, Minho pushed it back. "Keep it, and take this." He shoved a wad of cash, $20 bills, into Leo's hand. "Hide it in your shoe. Don't flash it. Buy food, not drugs." Leo looked at the money more than he had seen in his life. "I don't do drugs," he said firmly. "Good," Minho said. He sat on the bike, revving the engine. "I have to work. Stay hidden tonight. I'll check on you tomorrow." He watched Leo retreat into the shadows, a small figure against the urban decay. Minho felt a pulling sensation in his chest, a tether stretching but not breaking. As he rode away toward the clubhouse, his phone rang again. It was the president. Minho answered via his helmet comms. "Where the hell are you, Minho?" the voice barked. "We have a sit-down with the triads in an hour." Minho merged onto the freeway, speeding up. "On my way, boss." Had a flat tire. He lied to his brothers. That was the first crack in the foundation. The club demanded total loyalty, total transparency. Hiding his involvement with a homeless kid was a breach of trust, but Minho couldn't explain it, not to men who saw kindness as a weakness. The day dragged on, filled with smoke-filled rooms, tense negotiations, and the threat of violence. But Minho's mind wasn't on the triads or the territory lines. It was on a freezing alleyway and a boy with bare feet. He kept checking the weather app on his phone. The temperature was dropping fast. By nightfall, the guilt was unbearable. He left the clubhouse early, feigning a headache, and rode straight for a department store. He walked through the aisles, a terrifying figure in leather, picking out items, thick socks, heavy boots, thermal underwear, a beanie. He didn't know the sizes perfectly, so he guessed big. He rode back to Koreatown, the city lights blurring in his vision. He wasn't sure what he was doing anymore. Was he trying to save the boy, or was he trying to save himself from the ghost of his brother? He pulled up to the alley, expecting to find Leo sleeping under the blanket, but the alley was empty. The pallets were overturned. The blanket was gone, and on the ground, shining in the beam of his headlight, was one of the $20 bills, stained with fresh blood. Minho stared at the blood-spotted bill on the wet asphalt, his breath hitching in his throat. The engine of the Road King idled with a menacing rumble, echoing the sudden rage boiling in his blood. The overturned pallets and the scattered trash told a story of a struggle, a brief and violent interruption to the boy's quiet misery. Minho killed the bike's engine and dismounted, drawing a heavy steel flashlight from his belt. He swept the beam across the alley, looking for clues, his mind racing to the worst conclusions. He found drag marks in the grime, leading deeper into the alley toward a chained-link fence that separated the commercial strip from a condemned apartment complex. The K-Town killers. It had to be. He had humiliated them earlier, and cowards always punched down to reclaim their pride. They wouldn't come for Minho directly. They would go for the soft target he had foolishly marked as his own. The realization that his protection had likely caused this attack hit him like a physical blow. Minho didn't call the police. In his world, calling 911 was a sin, and besides, the police wouldn't prioritize a missing homeless teen in a bad neighborhood. He moved with the silent, deadly purpose of an enforcer. He vaulted the fence, ignoring the barbed wire that snagged his jeans, and landed in the overgrown courtyard of the abandoned building. He heard laughter coming from the second floor, the high-pitched, nervous cackles of meth heads enjoying their cruelty. He climbed the fire escape, the rusted metal groaning under his weight. Through a boarded-up window, he saw the flicker of a lighter. He peered through a crack. Inside, 3 of them, including the one from the morning, were gathered around a mattress. Leo was there, curled in a ball, bleeding from his nose and lip. They weren't killing him, but they were tormenting him, ripping up the wool blanket Minho had given him, tossing the pieces like confetti. "Thought you had a bodyguard, huh, rat?" the thug sneered, kicking Leo in the ribs. Leo didn't cry out. He just whimpered, clutching his stomach. The sight snapped the last tether of Minho's restraint. This wasn't club business. This wasn't a territory war. This was personal. This was a man protecting a child from monsters. Minho didn't bother with stealth. He kicked the plywood covering the window, the wood splintering inward with a crash that sounded like a gunshot. He stepped into the room, a demon rising from the dark, the flashlight beam cutting through the dust. The thugs froze, their laughter dying instantly in their throats. They saw the patch on his vest, the fury in his eyes, and they knew they had made a fatal error. "I told you," Minho said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I'd come for your fingers." He didn't use a weapon. He didn't need one. He moved like a freight train. The first thug tried to pull a knife, but Minho broke his wrist with a single, practiced twist, sending the blade clattering to the floor. He threw the screaming man into the wall, knocking him unconscious. The second thug bolted for the door, abandoning his friends. Minho let him go. He wanted the story to spread. He turned his attention to the leader, the one who had kicked Leo. The kid backed away, hands up, pleading. "It was just a joke, Minho. We were just messing with him." Minho grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off his feet, slamming him against a pillar. "He's a child," Minho roared, his control slipping. "You beat a starving child because your ego got bruised?" He tightened his grip, watching the light fade from the thug's eyes, tempted to finish it, to snuff out this waste of life. But then he heard a sound. Leo coughing, struggling to sit up. "Don't!" the boy rasped. "Don't kill him." Minho looked at Leo, whose face was swollen, one eye shut. The boy was begging for the life of his tormentor. It was a purity that Minho didn't deserve to witness. He dropped the thug, who gasped for air and collapsed, wetting himself in fear. "Get out," Minho hissed. "If I see you in this city again, you're dead." The thug scrambled away on hands and knees. Minho knelt beside Leo, checking his injuries. Ribs likely bruised, maybe cracked, split lip, concussion, but alive. He took off his leather vest, the sacred kuta of the Joseon riders, and wrapped it around the boy. It was huge on him, swallowing his small frame, smelling of tobacco and leather. "I'm sorry," Minho whispered, his voice cracking. "I brought this on you." "You came," Leo said, wonder in his voice. "You actually came back." He reached out and grabbed Minho's hand, holding it tight. "Nobody comes back." The statement broke Minho. The emotional wall he had built for years crumbled into dust. He wasn't just an enforcer anymore. He was a guardian. He picked Leo up in his arms, the boy weighing no more than a bag of feathers. He carried him out of the building, down the fire escape, and back to the bike. He placed Leo on the seat, balancing him carefully. "We're not going back to the alley," Minho said firmly. "We're going home." "Your home?" Leo asked. "Yes," Minho replied. "My home." He knew the risks. He knew the club wouldn't approve. He knew his life would change. But looking at the battered kid wearing his vest, Minho didn't care. He started the bike, the vibration soothing the tension in his muscles. As they rode away, leaving the violence behind, Minho realized he had crossed a line he could never uncross. He had chosen a side, and it wasn't the club's side. It was the human side. The chapter ended with the image of them riding under the streetlights, Leo's small hands clutching the waist of the giant, the oversized leather vest flapping in the wind like a flag of truce in a war-torn city. Minho's apartment was a stark contrast to the warmth he had shown Leo. It was a bachelor pad in a gritty complex near Wilshire, sparsely furnished with a leather sofa, a glass table littered with motorcycle magazines, and a fridge that contained mostly beer and take-out containers. When he carried Leo inside, the boy looked around with wide eyes as if entering a palace. Minho laid him on the sofa and went to the bathroom to get the first aid kit. As he cleaned the cuts on Leo's face, the boy flinched but didn't pull away. The silence between them was heavy. Minho felt the weight of responsibility crushing him. What was he doing? He couldn't raise a kid. He was a criminal, a violent man with a target on his back. He had no idea how to be a father figure. His own father had been a drunk who used fists more than words. "You have a shower," Minho said, pointing down the hall. "Hot water, clean towels. I left some clothes in there. They'll be huge, but they're clean." Leo nodded and limped toward the bathroom. When the door closed and the water started running, Minho sat at his kitchen table, head in his hands. He poured himself a shot of soju, staring at the clear liquid. Minutes later, he heard a thud from the bathroom. He rushed to the door. "Leo?" No answer. He kicked the door open. Leo had collapsed on the floor, naked and shivering, weeping uncontrollably. It wasn't just pain. It was the release of years of tension. The hot water, the safety, the kindness. It was too much for his system to process. He was overwhelmed by the sudden realization that he was safe. Minho wrapped a towel around the boy and sat on the floor with him, simply holding him while he cried. He didn't say it's okay because it wasn't. He didn't offer platitudes. He just offered presence. The water hissed from the shower head, steam filling the room. "I'm scared," Leo sobbed into Minho's chest. "I don't know how to be here. I don't know how to be inside." "I know," Minho grumbled soothingly. "The street gets in your bones. It takes time to wash it out." He remembered his own brother, how hard it was to bring him back from the edge, how he had failed. He vowed silently that he wouldn't fail this time. He lifted Leo up and helped him dress in an oversized t-shirt and sweatpants. They ate ramen in the living room, sitting on the floor. Leo looked at Minho. "Why me? Lots of kids out there." Minho chewed slowly. "Because you stopped. Everyone else kept driving. You stopped for the Halmoni. That means you got a heart. The street tries to kill your heart first. I wanted to make sure yours survived." Later that night, Leo fell asleep on the sofa, clutching the remote control like a weapon. Minho watched him, unable to sleep. He knew that tomorrow brought a new set of problems. The K-Town killers wouldn't forget the beating. The club would ask questions. Social services might get involved if anyone found out. Minho realized he was at rock bottom in terms of his old life. He was compromising his standing in the club, risking a gang war and harboring a runaway. Logic dictated he should give the kid some money and drop him at a youth shelter in Santa Monica. But looking at Leo's peaceful face, the bruises stark against his skin, Minho knew he was trapped. He walked to his closet and pulled out a box. Inside was a leather jacket, a small one. It had belonged to his brother when he was a teenager. It was a vintage piece, well worn but cared for. He dusted it off, the smell of old leather bringing back a flood of memories. He sat on the floor, oiling the jacket, preparing it. He heard a noise and turned. Leo was awake, watching him. "Whose jacket?" Leo asked sleepily. "My brother's," Minho said. "He's gone now." Leo sat up. "Did he ride too?" Minho nodded. "Yeah, he rode. He fell. Didn't get back up." "I fall a lot," Leo said softly. Minho looked him in the eye. "We all fall, kid. The trick is having someone to help you up. I didn't help him up fast enough. I won't make that mistake with you." The conversation stripped away the last of the pretenses. They were two broken people trying to fit their jagged edges together. Minho realized that by saving Leo, he was desperately trying to save himself. It was a selfish act of altruism, but it was the most honest thing he had done in years. "Go to sleep," Minho said, turning off the lamp. "Tomorrow we ride. We have to go back to the corner. The Halmoni will be there." Leo looked confused. "Why?" Minho smiled in the dark. "Because you started something. You have to finish it. You have to show the street that you're still standing." The chapter ended in the quiet dark of the apartment, the city noise muffled outside. Minho lay on the floor next to the sofa, guarding the boy, his handgun within reach, finally finding a peaceful sleep he hadn't known in a decade. The morning sun hit the pavement of Koreatown with a brilliant, blinding clarity. Minho and Leo stood in the garage of the Joseon Riders clubhouse, a converted warehouse filled with tools, bikes, and the smell of stale beer. Minho had brought Leo here first, a dangerous gamble. He needed to legitimize the boy's presence before rumors spread. The president, a stoic older man named Dragon Kim, stood with his arms crossed, inspecting Leo. Leo was wearing the vintage leather jacket Minho had oiled the night before. It was still a bit big, the sleeves rolled up, but it fit his shoulders. He looked less like a victim and more like a prospect. He stood straight, mimicking Minho's posture, trying to hide his fear of the bearded, tattooed men surrounding him. "You brought a stray into the house, Minho," Dragon said, his voice neutral. "You know the rules. No civilians, no kids." Minho stepped forward, placing a hand on Leo's shoulder. "He's not a civilian anymore, boss. He took a beating from the K-Town killers and didn't rat. He stood his ground. He's with me. He's under my wing." The room went silent. Taking someone under your wing in the club meant Minho was fully responsible for him. If Leo stole, Minho paid. If Leo talked to the cops, Minho bled. It was the ultimate vow. Dragon looked at Leo's bruised face, then at Minho's determined eyes. He nodded slowly. "Your funeral, Minho. Keep him close. If he causes trouble, you handle it." With the club's tacit approval secured, Minho led Leo out to the bike. "Now we handle the rest," Minho said. He handed Leo a brand new helmet, a sleek black one he had bought that morning. "Put it on. We're going to the corner." Leo buckled the strap, his hands steady. He felt different in the jacket. He felt like he had armor. They rode back to the intersection of Olympic and Vermont. It was busy again, the morning rush in full swing. Minho parked the bike right on the sidewalk, not caring about the pedestrians. He got off and stood next to Leo. They waited. 10 minutes later, the Halmoni appeared, pushing her cart, looking as frail as ever. When she saw Leo, she stopped. Her eyes widened behind her thick glasses. She recognized the boy who had helped her, but he looked transformed. He wasn't the dirty, shivering ghost anymore. He was clean, dressed in leather, standing next to a giant guardian. She bowed low, a deep, respectful bow. Leo bowed back, a perfect 90-degree angle. He walked over to her, Minho trailing a few steps behind. "Let me help you, Halmoni," Leo said in English. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the intent. She smiled, revealing gums and gold teeth, and patted his cheek. But the moment was interrupted. A black sedan screeched to a halt at the curb. 3 men stepped out, older, harder than the street thugs from the night before. K-Town killers' lieutenants. They had heard about Minho beating their runners. They were here for a show of force. "You got a lot of nerve coming back here, Ryder," the lead gangster said, reaching inside his jacket. The street went quiet. Passers-by scattered. Minho stepped in front of Leo and the Halmoni. He didn't reach for a weapon. He just stood there, an immovable object. "I'm not here for war," Minho said loudly, his voice projecting over the traffic. "I'm here to set the rules. This corner, it's neutral. This woman, she's protected. This boy, he's my son now." The declaration hung in the air. My son. Leo looked up at Minho's back, shock washing over him. The gangster hesitated. He looked at Minho's cut, then at the traffic cameras, then at the gathered crowd. Starting a war with the Joseon Riders over a homeless kid and an old lady wasn't good business. It was suicide. The gangster scoffed, spitting on the ground. "Keep your trash, Minho. Just stay off our blocks." They got back in the car and drove off. It was a retreat. Minho had won without throwing a punch. He turned to Leo. "You okay?" Leo was crying silently, tears tracking down his bruised cheeks. "You said I was your son." Minho knelt down, eye level with the boy. "Family isn't blood, Leo. Family is who bleeds for you. I'm claiming you. You don't have to be alone anymore." He wiped the tear from Leo's face with his thumb. The Halmoni, sensing the emotion, reached into her cart and pulled out 2 tangerines. She pressed one into Leo's hand and one into Minho's. It was a humble offering, all she had. Minho took it with both hands, bowing his head. The confrontation wasn't about fighting the gangsters. It was about Minho confronting his own fear of connection. He had claimed the boy publicly. There was no going back. He had exchanged his freedom for a family, and looking at Leo in that oversized jacket, he knew it was the best trade he had ever made. The chapter ended with Minho and Leo helping the woman push her cart down the block, the fearsome biker pushing a shopping cart, while the boy walked proudly beside him, the city watching in awe. A month had passed since the incident at the intersection. The morning air was crisp but sunny. The alleyway where Leo used to sleep was empty, the trash cleared away. Life in Koreatown moved on at its frantic pace, but for Minho and Leo, the rhythm had changed entirely. Leo was enrolled in an alternative school program for at-risk youth, a condition Minho had insisted on. Every morning the roar of the Road King signaled the neighborhood that Leo was off to class. Minho would drop him off at the gates, waiting until Leo was inside before riding away. The other kids stared at the biker dad, and nobody dared to bully Leo. Minho had changed too. He drank less. He spent his evenings helping Leo with homework he barely understood, or teaching him how to clean the carburetor of the bike. The apartment had softened. There was food in the fridge, a second bed in the corner, and a pair of small sneakers by the door next to the heavy engineer boots. On this Saturday morning, they rode to the intersection again. It had become a ritual. They parked the bike and waited. The Halmoni arrived on schedule. Leo ran to her, taking the cart handle. He didn't just help her cross. He helped her sort the bottles at the recycling center down the street. Minho watched, leaning against a wall, smoking a cigarette with a small smile playing on his lips. The community had noticed. Shopkeepers who used to shoo Leo away now waved at him. Mrs. Park at the food stall gave them extra dumplings for free. The K-Town killers stayed in their shadows, respecting the unspoken truce. The act of kindness had created a ripple effect, a small circle of warmth in a cold city. Minho's club brothers had eventually accepted Leo. They called him Cub. They taught him how to play pool and how to respect the patch. Leo had a dozen uncles now, all rough, scarred men who would burn the city down if anyone touched a hair on his head. But Minho was Appa, Dad. As Leo finished helping the woman, he walked back to Minho, his face flushed with exertion and happiness. "She said her back hurts less today," Leo reported proudly. Minho nodded. "Good job. You're building good karma, kid. You're gonna need it. Can we go for a ride? A long one?" Leo asked, looking at the mountains in the distance. Minho tossed him his helmet. "Yeah, let's go up the coast, Pacific Coast Highway, see the ocean." They mounted the bike. Leo climbed on the back with practiced ease, wrapping his arms around Minho. The oversized leather jacket was starting to fit him better, or maybe he was just growing into the role. Minho kicked the starter, the engine coming to life with a mighty roar that turned heads. As they pulled away from the curb, merging into the traffic, Minho caught a glimpse of their reflection in a shop window, a monster and a boy, riding a machine of steel and chrome. But they didn't look like a mismatch anymore. They looked like two parts of a whole. Minho thought about the phrase people used, that angels watch over us. He looked in his rearview mirror at Leo's eyes behind the visor. He realized the synopsis of his life had been rewritten. He wasn't just a biker anymore. He was a father. And as for angels, well, Minho knew the truth now. Angels didn't always fall from heaven with white wings. Sometimes they rose from the dirty streets of Los Angeles, barefoot and hungry, reminding you that you still had a soul. And sometimes the angels rode Harleys, clad in black leather, saving the world one lost boy at a time. The bike accelerated, disappearing into the bright California light, leaving behind nothing but the fading rumble of the exhaust and a story that the streets would whisper for years to come.